I'm obliged to then also say, because I am an ambassador for the SHAFE Foundation, to say that I think that Eduardo and Max, that you would find some of the work that's been done in the SHAFE Foundation very interesting as well, in trying to embed this in safe and healthy, age-friendly environments. And to some extent also, Karina, I would think the vice versa. There's actually some interesting stuff here. Um, so with that disclaimer, I've also managed to to um, to solve my ambassadorship for this today. But that is fascinating, of course, and I guess Karina, you actually didn't mention that, but that's also interesting. All the stuff that we also do. Um, as well as what you just presented here. Um, I'm one thing that I'm curious of that I had on my immediate agenda was actually connected to what you mentioned before, Max. A lot of American very clever people have lost their jobs
Yeah.
that are working with healthcare analysis, healthcare planning, healthcare research. And some of them we can already see will likely be moving to Europe somehow, institutionally or physically as well. And I'm curious if maybe you've collectively you have given some thoughts about how, in many ways, one of the conversations we've had about Europe is its is its Eurocentricity. So this provides an opportunity suddenly to have a lot of people that have had a different mindset, albeit in a different context, but suddenly to provide an influx of fresh brains to the European context. Isn't that actually also an interesting opportunity for the future of health in Europe?
Yeah, sounds interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a member of the US Performance Institute. Actually, I'm sort of fellow. That's how I was involved, actually. And but I'm sort of a bit reticent to get involved. I'm not quite sure what's happening, And I mean, there's some of the people there, um, it's a bit hard actually when you're in a new group about finding out whether they're which side of the fence they're on. Yeah, I mean, actually, my own my brother is a soccer coach in the States, and his wife worked for the Trump organization. I discovered when my brother said, "Oh, she'd gone on a rally, um, a Trump rally," and it was the same day as the rally against Trump in the UK. So I sent something about Trump that I'd read from the Guardian and found that she was on a rally for Trump and not against. So that's a bit embarrassing. But so it is a I haven't managed to work out quite who's on which side and whether they're there. But I'm not actually really doing anything. I've developed some workshops for them, but I'm not doing anything currently now, really. But I think a lot of the people have got similar values to us. But I think the same, just as we find in Europe. I remember at one meeting, somebody said, I was telling somebody we really admired the French system, and the French said, oh, we admire the Germans, and Germans said we admire the British system. And in fact, really what happened was we were all trying to struggle with the same sorts of problems, and people all thought that they weren't very good and that other people were better. But actually, it's just that we're all struggling with difficult problems and often very similar problems. And I think you can learn because people just develop things differently. And I think true in the US. I mean, a lot of people trying to push through, the reforms that Obama started, and uh, you know, but have had obstacles on the way, and that how they've resolved them or not. But there'll certainly be some insights from
Mhm.
them. Yeah.
Eduardo.
Yeah, I just want to share a little bit of thoughts here when you mentioned Eurocentricity and the fact that potentially US people might be move to Europe, as you said, physically or institutionally, and that would be bring a fresh perspective on how Europe healthcare can evolve in the next future. Recently, like 2 weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast, very interesting one, given by an Italian journalist, and it's interesting because actually he was mentioning the fact that in the last 5 years, some European countries are losing an incredible amount of healthcare professional going to other countries outside Europe. I'm pretty sure that you're aware about this. So if we're seeing those movements in professionals that are coming from the US, other countries to Europe, but in the meanwhile, we are losing experts going to other countries, I see here some risks for sure of losing key minds and great minds, and there would be probably a completely change of expert providing their insights into European policy and healthcare. And it's a little bit sad because unfortunately, and I'm talking about Italy specifically now, the reason why these people are going away, it's because the national healthcare system is not supporting them enough financially, and also in terms of let's say educational support, scientific advancement. So there are a lot of healthcare professionals that are moving, for example, to Saudi Arabia or other Arab countries where they see the opportunity to provide these services there, or even doing research because there are better financing system and schemes compared to old ways of doing of, in this case, Italy. So I will look into what you just said, that potentially US people are maybe coming to Europe to work, to investigate a little bit how things can shuffle and change in the coming near future.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, if I can jump as well quickly,
You
first say that I'm very, well, you seem to be a better ambassador of Shafe than me, so thank you for that. I nevertheless left also the link in the chat in case Max and Eduardo or anyone else is interested to take a look. And when you were saying this, I was actually making this connection because also to explain a little bit, besides the work at Shine for well, almost 10 years now, together with a close colleague from the Netherlands, we have been working on this network raising around smart, healthy, age-friendly environments, which resonates a bit between this idea of how technology impacts on health and care and how to make it work along with communities and the built environments. And we got to a very big network, which is almost 800 people from 50 countries. And actually, we have a lot of US contacts. And I was making this link in my head now, as you were speaking, to say that it is quite interesting, whatever this means, that we did not have any contacts from US members during this period. Maybe everyone is still a bit appalled, I don't know, or trying to figure out how to move. But it would have made sense because I hear of some people getting away or trying to find alternatives in terms of jobs. And it would make sense to get some kind of contacts or trying to understand how things are moving, but this is not the case. So it's kind of an interesting point. And maybe the second is that still, even with all of this, as and a bit as Max was referring, I also feel some hesitancy in a lot of people on how they place themselves, pro or con, pro or against, not the policy, but the fact that they have this president now. So it's kind of a strange thing all in all. I don't know. I think I would be setting myself on fire if I was there. You know, I think, of course, you have people screaming out loud and advocating, but it's still a kind of a dystopic reality at this point, I think, especially with everything being, well, a lot of things being closed up and all of the setback on policies that we see, and the fact, of course, and I would say this as well, that also in Europe we are having more and more leaders which seem to be at least challenging again some of the basic rights I thought we had or the basic assumptions. So it's not exclusive in America. Maybe this also justifies why people don't want to immigrate immediately, because maybe they would come and things would be similar, which is
Mhm.
anyway scary and strange.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
can I add
yes,
something?
of course, Nina.
It's a really interesting discussion, but it also, as a psychotherapist, it also really interests me in how can we talk about it in a way that's not really destroying our mental health. How can we sort of balance the discussions also, because I hear that a lot of, or I talk with a lot of young people who are actually kind of disillusioned, what do you call it? Lost their illusions when they think about their future. And it doesn't necessarily has to go with their profession, but it's just, it also has to do with what kind of country do I want to live in? What kind of house do I want to live in? Which profession do I want to take? So there's a lot of answers flowing in the wind right now, and I think that for example, I could have an idea that that EHFF could make some sort of webinars on how to take care of your mental health in a time like this, like we did in the COVID period. I think there's ways of talking about something that I would, if I sat with a client, would call a traumatic experience. How do we talk about it in a balanced way? So that's just what I'm thinking of listening to your conversations.
For sure. I can also add that I remember being at a WHO workshop, um, thinking about future strategy for health literacy at the time, and we were talking about how it would be a massive problem if suddenly huge amounts of healthcare professionals would no longer be able to travel between the different countries, but would be stuck in the individual national countries, because the the European or global healthcare system is so reliant on a kind of a flux of healthcare professionals. It's not an ideal system, but it is reliant on it. But what we also said at the meeting, that would require massive disruption, that wouldn't necessarily be what could possibly provide such a disruption. And when I then to say that we had that conversation in February of 2020, it was naively then for us to not really consider that the wolf was actually sort of just outside the front door, and was just waiting to actually puff and huff to create that disruption. But there was also a positive side to that, considering initially, at least, also a lot of the conversation we had about the global village before the pandemic now materialized during the pandemic, that truly we were actually connected by a common cause. And we had the digital skills of connecting like we are now, that we were not fully using at the time. And I would also add that the focus on mental health in and um, the demystification of it is a positive outcome of the pandemic. So what I'm looking at, or trying to distill from this conversation, that if we look aside the obvious problems that is ahead of us, there might also be an interesting opportunity. Um, while we cannot prevent the disruption from happening, but we can at least look at interesting outcomes that could also appear.
Well, just thinking of what Nina was saying, I think that it makes quite a good sense, and I would say that perhaps everyone needs to learn a little bit how to be how should I call it, unavoidable optimist. I mean, I think it's usually more a personality thing that maybe something you learn, but maybe we can try. Maybe we can try to give some tools for you to accept that you always need to be an optimist if you want to navigate through life and through all of the bumps. And especially now, that seems really important because it is what we can consider. I mean, if we are objective, checking at reality, there is no reason to keep the optimism unless we decide to. So maybe we also need to see how this new personality characteristics need to be embedded in the new generation if we really want to have better mental health and people actually participating, because it's not only about feeling well about themselves, but also taking the time to participate in society, since when you see everything very dark, you tend to just give up. So
Mm.
we need to keep some hope, I guess.
Mm. I really like the story that you told also, Max, about some people saying initially that it couldn't be done. And then you said, okay, I accept that, but try anyway. And suddenly it could be done. That's a fascinating story as well.
But that's
Uh,
because of involving people. If if you were the boss and you said that, and I was you know an occupational therapist, and I hadn't been involved, I would just tell you it's absolutely impossible, which it would be impossible really, because you don't know enough about my job as an occupational therapist to get it to make sure that what you do as a senior manager would be make it work, make my system work. But so if you don't involve the occupational therapist at the start and all the other professionals right the way along, the people involved in discharge and things like that, the consultant, then they'll all have a reason that what you've suggested is absolutely impossible. But if you involve them at the start and say, I know this is impossible. I've actually done this in university once. I wanted to suggest something. I said, this is impossible, but tell me why it's impossible and what we need to do to overcome that problem. And then you find people will come and suggest different things if they're on your side, and if you can get them to identify with the overall thing you're trying to achieve, whether it's reduce obesity, climate change, improve outcomes for patients, whatever it is, as long as you can get them to see that as the positive, then they'll come and help you make that decision. And I'd agree also with well everybody really here that Edward I was thinking of, but the patient involvement too. You make sure that they're involved because they're the key person in the system as well.
mhm,
Yeah.
for sure. I couldn't also help in some of the European policy discussions, talking about impossible problems. We talk sometimes about wicked problems. We talk about difficult problems, but it could be. I was going to say fun, and that was probably not the right word, but then interesting, insightful to discuss impossible problems, things that we take for granted somehow. That well, we don't need to discuss that at all because it simply cannot be done. But still, it could be a good idea sometimes to revisit that assumption, because there might be bias that leads us to think that, or as you said, Max, if you also do not have the actual unpractical skills or insights, you would simply assume from observation that it cannot be done, but you've never actually tried to involve them. And in I suppose both in the work of Cormac Russell on asset-based community development, what happens if you ask people what can be done?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Really good progress.
The other thing you mentioned actually about the US approach, actually, which is actually I realize some of what I do is a bit like the Americans rather than the British, whereas the British would say, oh, we can't do this because marketing won't like it, or in the health service, the consultants won't like it, or so and so won't like it, and that's where the conversation stops. We can't do it. Whereas an American approach would be, okay, the consultants won't like it. How are we going to deal with it? How can we involve them in doing it? So the British approach is to sort of tell you why it can't be done a bit more, whereas the American will say, well, okay, well, we realize communication is bad, partnership work is bad. What can we do to make that work? And I think that's a bit of I've observed some Americans in different places having that approach much more than the British do, who tend to be a bit negative about why we can't do something. And so that can be quite a bit of a positive energy, and saying, we know we've got climate change, we know certain groups of people haven't really got an incentive for it. Well, okay, what can we do to help them come on our side? And so that sort of approach can be quite.
I was right now got the idea that while we sometimes we joke with European differences on our approach to certain problems or tasks, without pointing any fingers at anyone, and especially because there's no French people in the room, so I can point all I want to. But you use the expression of a French approach where you do not solve the problem, but just continue to argue about why the problem's being posed in the first place, to avoid really maybe to actually try to tackle the phrase creatively. But the flip side of that is also that we tend not necessarily that much to perhaps play with these different approaches, either in terms of a kind of a role playing, or actually as a kind of a, what if we were to solve this problem as Germans? Or what if we were trying to solve these problems as Croatians, or similar, but thinking about how different styles of problem solving might sometimes pose a bigger challenge to the progress, yes, but also sometimes might actually lead to insights that you haven't actually done before. And without sort of just oversimplifying and dumbing it down, but it'd be interesting what are the benefits somehow to some of these other methods that I tend as a Dane not to use, because, well, I use often a Danish approach, obviously. It could be fun to be Portuguese for a day, Karina. Yeah.
You think?
Yeah, well,
We usually don't receive that unless you are coming to the beach.
yeah, maybe. Yeah. But it's just an interesting approach. I had a great conversation with a professor from a Danish from the University of Copenhagen about the difference in mindset between Chinese students and Danish students on their perception of how to present scientific results. And of course, given the fact that he was a professor in microbiology, the cells were no different for one student or the other. The truth was the same, but how they interpreted these different results was dependent upon their mindset. And the same in a way to what you said before, Max. You have a tendency to think about a certain methodology that you apply to the problem that leads to sometimes your analysis of saying, no, this cannot be done. And you're overlooking that your methodology sort of led you there, and not necessarily the reality. You may know, speaking of, I'll be diving into your book as well, Max, but I also found a new book by John Edmondson recently as well, and maybe you helped him write it, The Handbook of Action Learning, which was a wonderful insight into many of the things that we as collaborators and change makers have tried quite a number of times, but here we sort of had a um, so sometimes you'll be stuck with a funder that doesn't understand what you were trying to do and want immediate results and KPIs that doesn't actually apply to the problem that they posed. Oh, yeah, I've done that. Um, so it's, again, but thinking about in a metaphysical approach about how we sometimes apply our action learning was interesting. Um, there could be. I'm wanting you to nod, Nina. There could be an interesting learning experience in playing with different cultural perspective on problem solving, couldn't there?
Certainly, certainly. I just want to add, and I see your hand, Eduardo. I just want to add that
Oh, sorry.
one thing that I saw recently was that the Danish broadcasting, what do you call it, channel, have had a series of news that are called hopeful news, and it's news that started after COVID. And some of them are, of course, in a lot of different topics, but some of them are also concerning health. And I think that's, yeah, that's also like a sub topic that we could focus even more on in the EHFF. But now it's your turn, Eduardo.
Yeah, I just want to add upon what Lars and Mark said before, and I like the way the conversation where it's going concerning taking different perspectives. So last year I was reading this book by Adam Grant, Think Again, and it was really nice because one of the key messages there was exactly this. So take different perspective especially when you're stuck in an issue, and yeah, it's definitely true. Especially last year, in my previous job, I was stuck in a huge issue with some colleagues, and in the end, it seems really stupid, but the way to go forward was to take the project and reverse it. So we start from the end. And it was a different approach. It was completely disrupting the original flow that the entire project was designed. But it helps so much people to look things differently. Instead of starting from the beginning, let's start from the end. And it's just an example to build up on what you said, that actually, indeed, yeah, there might be challenges, impossible challenges, but depending on the perspective you're taking, you might see different things. And yeah, it was just to add something more.
Before I was also thinking especially about a lot of different peace resolution processes, and I was not referring to the Russian-Ukrainian war in this particular context for sure, but a lot of historical peace resolution processes, they seemed impossible to begin with, and yet led to some kind of quite a number of them led to positive outcomes. Not all, of course, but even things that are so traumatizing as war can be resolved.
Yeah, the resilience of people are really, yeah, enormous.
But hopeful news. Yeah.
But I just wanted to add, because looking at the time, is that Lars and I, when we started being part of the management in the EHFF, was also sending out mails to the existing members about, of course, their jobs and what their interests were, but also if they had any ideas or projects or things that they wanted to contribute to in the EHFF. But it could also be topics that they wanted the whole forum to work with or discuss. So I just wanted to give you a chance to comment on that. Yeah, before we round up. anything missing or anything that you would like to see in the future here in EHFF?
So many things. Maybe that would keep us a bit. But maybe, and also, well, because I like future studies and also in general, this idea of trying to envision something more positive, maybe we could consider grabbing a good group and trying to put together one or two future scenarios where we see things matching up within a feasible, reasonable scope, but that could also be this point of giving us hope if we understand that there are feasible things that we could be implementing in the near future. So I would maybe leave this as a suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, we've we've tried, and that is of course not the only, for sure not the only way to do it. We've tried to work with how, for instance, to educate European youth on the well-being economy, a complex issue um, that we at the time thought that if you could get people to also see the possibility of agency, that's one of the pathways to hope. I mean, if you think that you cannot possibly change the trajectory of anything, then of course, well, you become pacified and think, well, I read actually at one point that that is in part one of the American problems is that a lot of different voters think that their vote doesn't matter anyway. So there's no reason to do anything, and that disease could become a European disease as well. These are contagious diseases for sure. But if you think that there is little reason for you to act, you tend not to care. So by explaining even the complex issues on the well-being economy, okay, there's actually a role for you here. It's just there's a role for you in the SDGs, for instance. There's a role for you in climate change, um, and so on. Even though obviously it's a small one of 6 billion. Well, yours is there too. But yeah, that would be the I there was an Irish guy, I think he is, who coined the phrase of talking about the Ministry for Imagination, but the Academy for Hopeful Minds or something similar could also be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we actually work with a municipality here, which has a happiness and well-being department. So it's already a move on the right way, I would say.